A study released in the last week out of Denmark indicates that people who identify as transgender are 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. I'm boycotting Nike, and I'll explain why. And we're going to come full circle on exactly what are the consequences of allowing woke ideology to fully embed itself in society. It's pretty much there now in the US, loading at 95% in the UK. All of that coming up and more. I'm Jordan Maggie, trying to think lucidly about things. In the office last week, I was having a bit of a debate with one of my workmates, one of the few people I can actually still have an honest, open discussion with in the office at work. And I was saying that I'm a bit disillusioned with how all of these companies are driving these, I would say, performative solutions for diversity and equity, when in reality, it's all just virtue signaling, like with Nike and Budweiser, which I'll come on to a little bit later. And that isn't me being cynical. That is just the reality of it. That's what they're doing. We're ultimately all just a replaceable number, and companies are leveraging ideologies to generate greater brand equity. It's marketing at the end of the day. It's internal marketing and external marketing. And if it negatively affected the P&L, the campaign would stop. Image and money are the drivers, but we have to pretend that it's not the driver, that they're actually woke and progressive. And these campaigns, they start to alter the way people outwardly express themselves and their views on things. And actually, people start to suppress their opinions. Anyway, somehow we got onto the topic of trans rights. And being that it's a bit of a taboo topic, people generally toe the line or are impartial. In fact, I would say that it's actually nearly impossible to voice any sort of traditional perspective in the corporate workspace these days, especially if you would like to progress within the business. It's sort of a CLM, career limiting move, which is actually quite ironic because people preach a message of tolerance and acceptance and inclusion, and yet actually they only tolerate one perspective, theirs. It's sort of a weird paradox, progressivism only. But I do try to speak my mind whilst also navigating through trying to keep my job too. And I paraphrase here, but she said to me, "Do you believe that trans people exist?" And I said, I do, because I do. I said, I do, and I elaborated. I said, I feel sorry for them suffering with these devastating mental health issues, which I cannot even begin to imagine. It must be horrendous, and I feel for them. And she replied, "What do you mean mental health issues? You can't say that." And it sort of unraveled from there, you can imagine. And we discussed quite a few different topics. Amongst other things, one of them was suicide. And her belief was that people should be more accepting and affirming of trans people in order to prevent suicidal tendencies. And I, on the other hand, do not see that as a solution. In fact, I see it more as kicking the can further down the road. And a cohort study, which I'll come on to in a little bit, out of Denmark, actually affirms my beliefs or my concerns, for lack of a better word. And my point here is that you leave these conversations feeling like a bad person for not bowing to the current dogma, as if biological facts are now somehow ludicrous mythology. Not that she was trying to make me feel like a bad person. She was just comprehensively disagreeing with me, operating under the premise that it's better to be nice. But I believe it's actually better to be honest with what the reality is rather than appease people's feelings. Feelings are a secondary issue, and I think if feelings come first, then we're probably doomed. Facts do not care about feelings, and they shouldn't. So I can say that many of these people are suffering with mental health issues because they are. And I think it's important to say it actually. We have to be able to speak openly about our beliefs and concerns. Simple. And for my part, I think, how else could we explain how trans as an identity has exploded all of a sudden? Other than it's a social contagion like bulimia. And yes, I know many of you will be sitting there thinking, well, actually, no, it's because it's simply more widely accepted now. And so we would expect to see a rise in trans people. And to a degree, yes, that's true. And yet, gender dysphoria was historically pretty much comprehensively always associated with men. And now, apparently, it seems to be snowballing in the teenage girl community, the very same community most susceptible to social contagions like bulimia. We have a mental health issue, not a let's redefine the parameters of reality to accommodate people's feelings issue. Gender affirmation, at least in my opinion, in most instances, is a plaster at best. And for some odd reason, for the first time in history, adults are being recommended to take direction from children to actually give children what they want rather than what they need. And so if your 9-year-old boy comes home requesting tattoos, be sure to affirm his wants, not with a wash-off tattoo. Let's take him down to Alan's Tattoos, get him a tribal piece down his arm, or maybe even the Mike Tyson piece above his eye. It might be painful, he might live to regret it, but he knows best after all. So a study out of Denmark was released this week which tracked over 6.5 million people for more than 4 decades, and it concludes that transgender individuals are more than 7 times more likely to attempt suicide and have a 3.5 times higher suicide mortality rate than non-trans people. Now, progressives often suggest that trans individuals have existed throughout history in the same volumes that we see them in today, but it's just more widely accepted now, and so more people are coming out of the closet. But if that were the case, then in the data, we would expect to see a relatively consistent volume of suicide attempts across history, with actually a decline in recent years due to the greater acceptance and understanding. But we don't. The more people who identify as trans, the more suicides overall we get despite the broader acceptance. And yes, I know that correlation isn't cause. You could probably somehow argue that maybe this generation has more stress on them, although I'm not sure that older generations would necessarily agree, having survived wars and food scarcity, amongst other things. But it certainly is different now, I get that. And you might maybe infer that perhaps the suicide rates would be higher if not for the greater acceptance of trans identity that we see. But then that would not comply with the trend that we see in the most thorough follow-up of sex reassignment ever conducted, which extended over 30 years, conducted in Sweden, where I should say the culture is strongly supportive of the transgender community. And this study documents lifelong mental unrest and suicide rates rising to 20 times comparable peers 10 to 15 years post reassignment. So fully transitioning actually increases your likelihood of death by suicide. In short, this notion that trans affirmation is the only solution is wrong. It's not even a good solution. Maybe what we are seeing is more indicative of a mental health issue manifesting itself under the guise of gender dysphoria because of popular culture. There's a lot going on for children now. There's a lot of stresses. A lot of young people are being influenced by social media. There's not enough outdoor time, not enough sunlight. There's not enough healthy foods. There's too many toxic foods and a big, massive dose of narcissism, and clearly not enough support. All of that topped off with influence from misguided adults in positions of power leads children in a sort of helpless direction. And the trouble is, you're bigoted if you say that. And this is a simple issue. If your child is depressed or confused and frames issues with gender-based language, likely used because they've been groomed or coerced by woke activists or campaigns, it's actually because they've been assigned the wrong gender or even species. which in a roundabout way brings me to my next topic. A teacher in the UK rightly under fire for scolding two young girls for not affirming their classmate who identifies as a cat. Yep, you heard me right. This is how it's beginning to unravel here in the UK. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'll pick them up in the next episode. It's important that we discuss these things. I'd love to understand what everyone else thinks of all of these topics. Yes, you heard me correctly. If a 13-year-old indicates that they believe that they are not a human, but in fact a cat, then we should take their word, respectfully, to ensure that no feelings are hurt, of course, and affirm what they're saying. Here's a snippet from the clip that's been circulating.
How dare you? You just really upset someone. Saying things like, should be in an asylum.
I didn't say that. I just said if they want to identify as a cat or something, then they're like genuinely unwell.
Then they've gone
they're crazy.
You were questioning their identity.
I wasn't a question. I was just saying about the gender. I haven't said anything about them.
But where do you get this idea from that there's only two genders?
I just think it's my opinion.
That is my opinion.
If I respect their opinion, can't they respect my opinion?
It is not an opinion.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
but
It's not an opinion you
There's
can
only
have.
And those people think there's only two genders.
There's only a boy and a girl.
Literally. There's no other
male.
private part. There's only
There are
two.
lots of genders.
Right.
There is transgender. There is agender. People that don't believe they have a gender at all.
Yeah, but you can't have that.
No, you can't have that. It's not a law.
Yeah, no,
It's not a law, but it's our opinion. We just don't agree with it. We just think it's all just.
if you have a vagina, you're a girl. If you have a penis, you're a boy.
Yeah.
But cisgender is not necessarily the way to be. You were talking about the fact that cisgender is the norm. That you identify with the gender, with the sexual order that you're born with, or you're with. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which is really despicable.
How? When it's
If I called my mum right now, my mum would
Same.
kill myself.
If I call my mum, she's sad.
Well, that's very sad as well then.
How is it?
Loads of people agree with that. There's only a small majority of people who actually think that.
And why do you think we have so many problems in the world with homophobia?
Yeah, but
Because
that's not
people
homophobia.
express it.
That's gender.
Yes,
I'm
it
fine with
is.
lesbians and gay people.
Same.
I've got nothing
We need
against
to
them.
have a proper educational conversation about equality, diversity and
I ain't doing
inclusion.
it. My mum
Because
doesn't
I'm
have
not
that.
having that expressed in my lesson.
So much to unpack here. Firstly, this woman is an absolute moron and clearly not at the competency level anyone should expect from a teacher. Imagine labelling these girls despicable for recognising that if you were born with a vagina, you are, whether you feel like it or not, a girl. For this grown woman to speak the words, "It's not an opinion you can have," is the definition of tyranny. And it goes back to the point I was trying to make earlier, that people preach this notion of inclusion and tolerance, but remember, they actually only tolerate progressivism. This idea that you can replace widely agreed truths with unproven theory in positions of power like this to demand acceptance as well from young, impressionable children is just unacceptable. And this lady's pushing a dogma that I'm not even sure she actually fully understands herself. Where did you get the idea from that there's only two genders? That's what she says. Up until a few years ago, this wasn't even a viable discussion. And now she's acting confused. And to somehow then conflate gender with homophobia is just absolutely idiotic. This is what is happening in schools. It's real. And we're lucky that these girls actually recorded it. We are now in the upside down world that is run by the alphabet mafia, where a young girl can claim to be a cat, be affirmed as such without any question or concern for mental health from adults, and it takes a couple of 13-year-old girls to consider that maybe something isn't adding up. Perhaps in the spirit of true affirmation, they should have fed this girl some cat food and kept her outside overnight. Then we'd actually see if she really thinks she's a cat. This seems to be sort of a sickness of wealth and prosperity from my perspective. At least we can say that these girls set a good example. They stand up for what they believe in. You cannot be silent on these topics. I think silence is acceptance. So at least they've done that. And to be quite honest, this is exactly why, if my partner and I are fortunate enough to have children, we will do our utmost to keep them out of the bot creating, creativity sucking, propagandist schools that we now have, that is the legacy school system in general. And am I crazy? Or did teaching used to be a job of prestige? Professionals who had dreamt of steering future generations to greatness and success. And now, I'm afraid to say, teachers, not all of them, but most of them at least, are just teaching because it's a respectable job, or where it was. And at least it should be, but I'm not sure that it is. These teachers have no oomph, they have no passion. It feels like an army of alternatives who trundle through school themselves, feeling underappreciated, have just returned to vent. Of course, they're indoctrinated by progressive ideologies because it speaks to their inner victim mentality. It's just crazy that it's happening. And I'm passionate about this because in the past few years, you begin to see how reality can be pulled from you and how people are easily manipulated, or worse, even simply just willing to go along with anything in order to get back to the ease of normal day-to-day life. And yet, if you are unwilling to stand by your belief system in times of hardship, you can't claim it as a belief at all. So by now, I'm sure many of you are aware that Nike have appointed Dylan Mulvaney as their face of women's sports and sportswear. For those of you who don't know, Dylan is a trans woman. I think I got that right, meaning that he was born with a penis, which he still has, and he doesn't have any breasts or anything like that. Yet Nike have appointed Dylan to promote, amongst other things, women's sports bras. Here is some of the videos promoting their collaboration.
What's some other workout stuff?
Yeah, high knees.
Super odd. I also want to share a video of Sharon Davies. She was quite vocal on this collaboration, and I think she makes some really good points. So I want to play you a clip of her opinion of this whole collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so frustrating, isn't it? We make two steps forward, what with World Athletics and then Swim England, in this country, protecting women's sport, and then this happens. It feels like it's just a parody of what women are. And in the past, it was always seen as an insult when people say, run like a girl. And here we've got somebody behaving, in a way that's very unsportslike, it's very unathletic. And it's just so frustrating when only 1% of the US sponsorship dollar in the whole of the USA goes to actual females in sport, that they would then do this. It just seems like literally like a kick in the teeth constantly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know how much I love women's sport, and there's so many amazing women's athletes who get nothing from Nike and are at the top of their game. And then you've got Dylan Mulvaney, right? And sure, look, I want Dylan to be happy. Go and be happy, Dylan. But you're not a woman. You're certainly not a sportswoman. And surely the crucial thing here, Sharon, is that Dylan Mulvaney has a man's body. So how on earth? Because, the whole thing with women's sport, and I know a lot of female athletes, it's all about sports bras for people with different sized breasts. It's about how you wear particular clothing when you have your periods. There's all of these issues that Dylan Mulvaney doesn't have to deal with any of.
it doesn't apply, to Dylan Mulvaney. I mean, Dylan Mulvaney is also being paid to promote Tampax, another product that they will never lead ever in their life. It's just so incredibly frustrating. And like you said, sports bras, when there is nothing to put in the sports bra, when it's really important that the women get proper support when they do sport. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, for a long time, they sponsored Alison Felix, one of the world's most incredible track athletes. And then when Alison got pregnant, they reduced her sponsorship by 70% when she had something happen to her that happens only to women. And so she left, and it's just this total disdain that women are being treated to at the moment. And particularly in the world of sport where physiology makes so much difference.
I'm with Sharon on this one. Biological women should be the ambassadors of women's clothing. Now, Nike has absolutely been one of my preferred brands over the years, but out of principle, I will not be purchasing Nike for the foreseeable future. I'm not going to be going out of my way to burn my Nike clothes, but I do believe that you vote with your money, and I do not support this move, and so I do not support Nike. Now, this is clearly, again, Nike simply trying to leverage woke ideology to capture sales in an evolving marketplace. We can at least credit them with standing by their decision, unlike Budweiser. Nike's stock value did take a big hit, as too did Budweiser's. But in case you don't know, Bud actually deployed the same sort of woke marketing ploy with, you guessed it, Dylan Mulvaney. But they actually didn't stand by their decision. The decision backfired heavily. Their stock price took a massive plummet. The drinkers of America's #1 beer didn't agree with the idea of having trans activism plastered all over their can. So rather than stand by their decision, Bud actually opted to pretend the hierarchy had simply nothing to do with the decision to collaborate with Dylan Mulvaney. They requested a lower ranking marketing VP to step down and take the hit. They even then denied any sort of sponsorship deal or agreement with Mulvaney, effectively throwing him under the bus to say, we had nothing to do with this, which subsequently turned out to be a lie. They did pay him and they were looking to campaign with him, but made a drastic U-turn as their progressive marketing ploy didn't hit the audience well. The Bud drinkers were not happy with it, so they cut it. Again, showing that it's all about money. And for that reason, I will never again drink a Bud. It's a weasel of a company. They take decisions and they don't even stand by them. And they don't stand by them because they don't actually believe in them. They're just trying to leverage woke ideology to increase their market share, i.e. get money. And it backfired. Woke activism has now influenced culture to a point that basic traditional beliefs are now difficult to even voice. Huge corporations are now leaning into woke marketing campaigns to try to generate more money for themselves. And as a byproduct, we see activists feeling vindicated, supported, and empowered, and the general public feeling alienated and confused. We have trans propaganda clearly fully flowing through our school systems, indoctrinating impressionable young children with, I think in many cases, parents unaware. And so to end this episode, I want to finish with a short plea from Abigail Martinez, who lost her daughter as the school county social workers disagreed with Abigail's resistance when a grassroots LGBT group sought to transition her confused 15-year-old daughter Yaley into a boy. Now, Yaley was moved into foster care, injected with testosterone, and manipulated for marketing campaigns. And her mother, who was heartbroken, could only watch helplessly as her daughter spiraled into depression.
My name is Abigail Martinez. It has been 3 years and 164 days since I lost my daughter, Yaley. I miss her every single day. Let me tell you how she died. My daughter was murdered by a gender ideology. CPS took my daughter when she was 16 years old. It was helped by her public school counselor and LGBTQ group rights and another trans-identified girl. My daughter was taken from her loving home because the state of California claimed I was abusive for not affirming her trans identity. I lost my daughter over a name and a pronouns. Even after I promised to call her a male name, it wasn't enough. My daughter was not a boy trapped in a girl's body. She had mental health issues. Against my consent, my daughter was given testosterone instead of therapy. The LGBTQ group used her to raise money for them. Look at the poor reject trans boy, they said. Why are there so many transgender in foster care? Because this state take them from their families, tell them to run, then steal them. Parents are given one option to treat their distressed child, affirm, drug, and remove their healthy body part, or else lose your child. The abuse claim against me was finally dropped, but it was too late. The damage was done. By then, my daughter was in a horrible mental and physical pain. My daughter knelt down in front of a train. She was murdered by gender ideology. I beg you, stop pushing gender ideology. I don't want any parent to feel what I feel every day. Affirmation is not good for the health, safety, and welfare of any child.
Yeah, that is hard to listen to, and I'm hoping that this poor woman's grief doesn't go unrecognized and that people start to see where we're heading. This is what happens when we allow progressive ideologies and activists to infiltrate positions of power and legislation. And it's important that we keep discourse rather than a one-sided agenda. And I want to be clear, I do not have any dislike towards trans people. I have no ill will towards trans people, but I do take issue with forcing your beliefs on others. And I do take issue with propaganda campaigns influencing younger generations. Ultimately, it manifests itself in life-altering decisions or even life-ending decisions. But thank you for listening and watching however you're tuning in. I'll see you on the next episode. Peace.